So today we're going to be talking about homework 3 for Python 1, where our goal is to use a turtle to draw a 2 by 2 grid of colored squares and a grid of colored triangles on top of the squares. And for each color, the fill should be a random color filled with a unique RGB color. So first thing we want to do is import the turtle module and the random module to set up the project. And to set up the turtle, we're going to use the turtle.turtle. And then but before we want to move to our starting position, we want to make sure we're not leaving any marks with the pen. So we're going to use pen up, and then we're going to go to our start position, which in this case is negative 60, 60. And then to start actually making a mark, we're going to use dot pen down. And we're going to set a few parameters just to make the code a little cleaner and easier to understand. So in this case, we want a 2 by 2 grid. So we're setting grid size to 2. And for each shape, we want a side to be of length 50. So we're setting shape size to 50. And for the gaps in between the shapes, we are just going to set that to 10. So to create the grid, we're going to be using nested loops. So our i's are going to represent our rows and the j's are going to represent our columns. So we're going to say for I in range grid size, which we defined up here, and we're going to for that I, so first we're going to do the first row, and we're going to do a loop with j to represent our columns. So for j in range grid size. And so the first thing we want to do is create our unique color. So we're going to have R, G, and B, and each of them is going to be a random integer in between 0 and 255. So we're going to set those three things. And then we're going to use the t.color to set the color, and then we're going to begin the fill before we start drawing. So if you remember from past lessons, we're going to use a for loop to draw the shapes. So in this case, square is 4 sides, and the angle is 90 degrees. So for uh, IDX in range 4, we're going to move forward by the shape size, which we defined up here. So we're going to move forward by 50, and then we're going to make a 90-degree turn to the right. And we're going to repeat that action 4 times to create the square, and then we're going to end our fill. So the next step is to move to the next shape in the row. So we're going to move to the next column. So again, before we do any moving, we want to make sure we pen up so we don't make a mark when we're moving to this next item. And we're going to move forward by the shape size plus the gap, because remember, when we're drawing the square, we end up back at the starting point. So in order to get over here, we want to move by the length of the shape size plus the gap. So we're going to end up here, and then we want to pen down so we can start drawing again. And so this loop is going to repeat for this next square because it's in the next column over. So all this code's going to repeat, and once it's finished with that, it's going to break out from this loop. And we're going to go to this code down here. And so this is the code to move down to the next row. So again, before we do any moving, we want to pen up so we don't create any unnecessary marks. And then we're going to go to first, the x coordinate is negative 60, which is the same as our starting point. So it's going to be along here. So we're just, instead of up here, we're going to be here. But in this case, instead of being at 60, which would be higher up, we want to move further down. And we want to move further down by the amount of one shape plus the gap, which is here you see is the shape plus the gap. And because we're only moving one uh, shape down, remember, ranges start at 0. So we're doing 0 plus 1. So this is going to be 1 times the shape plus the gap. So we're moving down one shape length plus the gap. So we're going to end up here. And again, we start at 60 and we want to move lower. So that's why we're subtracting this. So after that, we're going to pen down again so we can start drawing. And all of this code is just going to repeat again for this bottom row. So again, we're going to go through the same process of drawing out the squares in the different columns. So once all of the rows for this grid have been drawn, we're going to break out of this loop. And now we want to start drawing our triangles. So once again, before we move back to the starting point, we want to pen up. So we pen up, then we go to that specific position, then we pen down again. And so for these steps are basically the same as the squares except for one minor difference. So again, we're going to do for I and range grid size, for J and range grid size, we're going to fill, or we're going to create our random color, we're going to set that color and we're going to fill. And then the major difference is that triangles only have three sides, so we're only doing the for loop of for IDX in range 3. And then instead of 90 degrees, we're using 120 degrees. So again, it's the same process. So it's going to move forward, then turn to the right. So 120 degrees, then move forward, turn, move forward, and turn. And then we're going to end our fill, and then the same thing as before, we want to move over to the next shape. So it's going to be back here, and then we're going to pen up so we don't draw any unnecessary marks. We're going to move forward by the size plus the gap. We're going to end up here, pen down, process repeats. And this is essentially all the same code as what it was for the squares. Again, the only major difference is that there's only in range 3 and it's 120 degrees. So after you do all that, this should be the ending result.